Hi, everyone. Is this on for the recording purposes? Great. Not that we couldn't be intimate in this group. Welcome. My name is Alan Wiseman. I'm the chair of the Department of Political Science at Vanderbilt University. And along with Professor Craig Bolden, who's on the very far right over here, I co-direct the Center for Effective Lawmaking, which is a joint research, education, outreach institute that's sited between Vanderbilt University and the University of Virginia, the Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy in particular. And today we're extremely excited to bring together two well-esteemed former members of Congress to sit down and talk with us about their perspectives on effective lawmaking in the contemporary Congress, and it's important for a healthy and vibrant democracy. On my almost far right next to Craig, sits Mr. Earl Pomeroy, who represented North Dakota as a Democratic member of the U.S. House of Representatives from 1993 to 2011. During his time in Congress, Mr. Pomeroy served as a senior member on the influential House Ways and Means Committee, and he was the chair of the Social Security Subcommittee. According to our data at the Center for Effective Lawmaking, even prior to joining the Ways and Means Committee, he had established a track record as being a highly engaged lawmaker, including two Congresses, one in which he was in the minority party, in which he was identified as being, according to the Center's data, one of those members of Congress who was above expectations in their lawmaking effectiveness. And by that I mean, even once you control for being a member of the majority party or minority, his relative seniority, whether or not he controlled a committee or subcommittee chair, he was still notably more successful at advancing his sponsored bills through the legislative process than we would have expected him to be. He's currently senior counsel at the law firm Alston & Bird, and he sits as co-chair of the firm's Washington, D.C. pro bono committee. He also serves on the boards of both the National Job Corps Association and the National Academy of Social Sciences. And next to him, to my immediate right, sits Mr. Peter Roskam, who represented the 6th District of Illinois as a Republican member of the U.S. House of Representatives from 2007 to 2019. During his time in Congress, Mr. Roskam also served on the House Ways and Means Committee as well as the House Financial Services Committee. And also, according to our data at the Center for Effective Lawmaking, Congressman Roskam had also distinguished himself as a highly engaged lawmaker during his service in the House, including 4 Congresses where he's identified as being above expectations in his lawmaking effectiveness. Prior to serving in the U.S. House, Mr. Roskam served in the Illinois House of Representatives as well as the Illinois State Senate, where also, according to our data, he was above expectations in his lawmaking effectiveness in the Illinois State House for a total of 13 years. He's currently a partner at the D.C.-based law firm Baker Hostetler, where he's a leader of the federal policy team. He also serves as vice chairman of the National Endowment for Democracy, and he's on the board of directors for the Center of U.S. Global Leadership. So thanks to both of you for joining us today. We have a collection of relatively open-ended questions that we're hoping we could get you to engage with, and hopefully provide some examples from your own time on the Hill, as well as your observations as to what's going on right now. And to lead us in the discussion, I'm going to turn it over to Craig Bolden.
Yes, thanks again for joining us. We're very interested in talking about the specifics of your careers, but before that, wanted to dive into kind of the theme of today's panel most generally, which is effective lawmaking as a cornerstone of American democracy. And we'd love your perspectives on why should we care about if Congress is working well or not? Why should we care if the state legislatures are working well or not? What is their role within American democracy, and how can we get to a point where they're serving that role?
All right, I'll go first. I'm a poli-sci undergrad, and as I studied this stuff back 100 years ago, it all seems academic and kind of detached, like, well, it's in the doing. You get elected and you go do stuff. You don't really need to study too much how this all comes. It's not an academic exercise. This is real politics. Let's go do it. I've changed my mind, and we just come minutes off of the third unsuccessful vote for Mr. Jordan. The House continues without a speaker. I guess the case is made for political scientists trying to shed light on best ways to move the world's greatest democracy. We need your help. What I like to say to constituents is, you think about that magnificent dome. A dome, by the way, that was saved on 9/11 by those that took the plane down in Pennsylvania, about 20 minutes out of Washington, D.C. the symbol of democracy to the world. But for our purposes, it's the place under which a nation of 350 million people in the 21st century, extraordinary diversity by any way you cut it, geographic, racial, ethnic, economic. It's just an incredibly diverse and complicated country we have here. And under that dome, we got to find a common path forward. And so it's pretty awesome to think about the history that's been made under that dome. Never pretty, never ever pretty, trying to move forward. Not usually as ugly as it is now. But so I think that the cooperation between practitioners, supporting staff, and that, especially the supporting staff, engaged with institutions like this one and exercises like this weekend are really important to try and set the stage and give us ideas about how we can do this better. Peter?
Thank you. Well, it's a joy to be with you all, and thanks very much for the invitation, and it's always fun to be with my friend Earl Pomeroy. So getting back to the question of why do functional democracies or why do functional legislatures matter, I would submit that it's the place that we go to express our grievances and our aspirations. And that if grievances and aspirations are not given a forum and a venue that's beyond just sort of a coffee clatch or just a soapbox, but a place to really create remedies, if that's not in existence, then what ends up happening? What ends up happening is that people take their grievances to the street. Right. And we've been the beneficiaries in this country of remarkably stable situation for the last 2 centuries, notwithstanding bumps along the way. But I would say that if people feel as if, look, I know that I can present something and my representative is going to hear me, respect me and hear me, may agree, may disagree, my concept may be changed or amended, but I want it to be considered, and considered seriously. That takes a lot of edge off a lot of things. And I think we can relate to that on a personal level. We've all been in experiences, and we've all been interacting with people in our own lives. It can be family, it can be friends, it can be colleagues. And when you feel completely blown off, man, that really lights you up. It does me. It's like, don't treat me like that. At least listen to what I'm saying. You know, to the person at United Airlines when I'm frustrated with this, that, or the other. Listen to what I'm saying. It hurts when I'm returning a car or whatever it happens to be. And if I feel like I'm being heard and considered, it takes a lot of edge off. If I feel like I'm not, then it tends to be an accelerant, and it doesn't end well. So I'd say that that's really kind of a focal point for me.
And how are we doing on these?
We're doing okay. Look, so we're in one of those really, really tough seasons right now. And as Earl said, I mean, this drama that the House is dealing with right now is unprecedented, and yet not uncontemplated. So there's a process. The devolution of the Speaker or the removal of a Speaker is contemplated. The interim role is contemplated. A succession plan is contemplated. Now, it's not, there's no joy in this. There's nobody that says, wow, this is terrific, because it's not terrific. And yet, the sun came up. We were able to come together. We're gathering. And I predict that at some point in the next few weeks, probably, this will be settled, and there will be political prices to pay for those who are involved in this. And we don't know all the ramifications. So I would submit that our political life and our public life in this country has been through a lot rougher waters than this, and has managed to stay afloat. So my prediction is this is a super bumpy, this is sticking with the waters analogy, these are real rapids, but we'll get to calmer waters in weeks ahead.
We're going to have a really free-flowing, they've got beautiful questions and everything else, but we're just going to rock and roll here a little bit and want your participation too. I think that we're in times where democracy is facing a challenge from those that favor a much more authoritarian approach at governance, which is different. I'm 71 years old. I've never seen this before. I've seen liberal, conservative, all the kinds of manifestations, things we're used to, but not whether or not the world's greatest democracy shall continue to be a democracy. And so it's really scary to me. And I believe that the utter discrediting of the functionality of a democracy is just fuel to those, the Orbáns in Hungary, the Erdogan in Turkey, the others that have, through democratic processes, managed to basically seize that democracy and convert it to a much more authoritarian model. There are those that aspire to doing that here. And so these are scary times, and the fights are bigger than I've seen, and that we need your engagement in them.
So when we think about the nature of what will get us through these times, whether it's a shoot in the rapids or something more fundamental, there are a lot of it comes back in a democracy to the people, not only the people as voters, but the people who are willing to step up and enter public service. One of the things we've emphasized at the Center for Effective Lawmaking is really a focus on three parts of that. One is, who's choosing to run for state legislatures or for Congress? Are the people who would be effective there choosing to make that decision? Once they're there, once we've elected our representatives, are they facing the institution in a way that actually cultivates effective lawmaking or splinters them apart? And kind of on the far end, bringing then those public servants together with voters, are voters holding people accountable? And so I want to touch on each of those themes during our time together, but sort of start with that idea of who's choosing to enter public life at this point. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about why you chose to run for a state legislature or a Congress, and if you were in a similar career stage today, would it still be as attractive, or would it not be as attractive due to polarization and some of these other concerns?
I didn't grow up in a political household at all, and yet found myself as a young boy being sort of drawn into kind of the news, and I was the kid in the 8th grade Constitution section that couldn't get enough of it, and I was that boy. Yeah, I was that boy. And so found myself out here as a young guy, and was on Capitol Hill in my early 20s, and ended up making the decision to say, oh, this is something that I want to pursue, and I'm grateful that I did. So I don't look back with regret. I look back in some ways nostalgically about the time that I served in light of what we're seeing now. And I would continue to encourage people, because that's the subtext of what you're asking. Would you encourage people to go into public life today? And I absolutely would. I mean, I think that there's changing dynamics, and I think there's something that we need to get on the table. I am of the view that Congress and political leadership is actually downstream from our culture. Congress and the leadership reflects the culture. Now, what does that mean? That means that based on a lot of the coarseness that we've seen in our public life over the past several years, it's really no surprise to me that Congress is reflecting that same coarseness and that same sort of sharp-elbowedness. I'm of the view that we're now an instant gratification generation, and I put myself right in the middle of this, and it is influencing our expectations of how things get done. So, for example, we had a family emergency. My father was dying. I had to get a son home from overseas who was on a study abroad program. I sat down, I opened my app on my phone, I got a flight, an e-ticket, and a seat, and I sent it to him. 2 hours later, he's flying over the ocean, coming home. Now, I didn't say to the whole family, wow, this is the most amazing thing in the world. Will you look at what this machine did for me? Steve is going to be drinking Diet Cokes and eating pretzels over the Atlantic Ocean, all by the magic of this thing that I have in my phone. No, I sat down because I expected that to happen. I expected that. And I would submit that we have now saturated our politics with an expectation of instant gratification. We assume, hey, I voted for my person. I voted for my party. Now go out there and get it done. Now, it's interesting that we're at UVA because, you know, the founder, Thomas Jefferson, had a great view on this. He said, obviously, he was no stranger to the big picture, that is, the Declaration of Independence. Big declarations, big themes, very, very large, high expectations. And yet, 14 years later, he writes a letter to a man named Charles Clay, and in it, I'll give you, I'll listen to the incrementalism of a few of these lines. This is Jefferson. He said, "The grounds of liberty are to be gained by inches. We must be content with what we can get from time to time and eternally press forward for what is yet to get. It takes time to persuade men even to do what is for their own good." Now, try going into a meeting of any group across the political spectrum and say, I want to take an inch by inch approach. You're not committed to this, and I don't care where they are on the political spectrum. Far right, far left, doesn't matter. Because the expectations are you've got to show devotion and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that we need to really reflect on where we are as a culture as we're reflecting where these institutions are. And yeah, I would absolutely encourage people to go into public life. I think the recalibration of expectations during the course of campaigns is inextricably linked to future success. And the proof of that is high expectations that former Speaker McCarthy created that he wasn't able to hold up. And 15 votes for Speaker gives away more and more and more and more in that process, and 9 months later, it collapses underneath him. Why? Because the expectations were not well managed. So I'm not here pumping sunshine. I'm not here telling anybody that this is an easy enterprise right now, but what I am saying is it is a worthy enterprise that should really be pursued.
I would absolutely agree. I was also kind of a nerdy kid that really liked politics. I don't know why. My dad took me into the voting booth, and I made the X for John Kennedy. And I won't say the bug happened in that instant, but I was just more drawn to policy. I'm a lawyer. It wasn't a very good one. I like policy better than casework. And there's just nothing finer than going to work in the morning thinking, I want to advance the public interest today. My clients today are the people of North Dakota, and I want to get them the best deal I can. North Dakota has one member, so it was me, up to me in the House. And 12 of the 18 years, I was in the minority. So it took some. It was hard, but I wasn't a flaming partisan. I was basically an advocate for a state, and that's how I kind of constructed this in my mind. There's many ways you can play this game in the House. Some I think of them as issue brokers, almost like the guys wearing the funny coats and trading stocks. And their deal is to move stuff, and they're really great at process. They're great at whipping votes. They know how to make the place run. You know, that wasn't me. I was much more focused on, you know, the constituency and a few issues. I wasn't interested in leadership. There's some wonderful people in leadership. One of them was from down this way, Eric Cantor, who really bright, really good, and we were going to do some deals on Ways and Means. But then Eric decided he was going to go into leadership, where he also did quite well. It was the primary that tripped him up. He was doing great in leadership. But the role of the leader is to define the partisan differences between the two parties and make sure that your party is viewed favorably to the other party. And so off went Eric. We never did get to do our financial work together, but he executed his business in ways that still had admiration, I think, even though he'd tick us off from time to time from our side. The key is you can do this, you can play this rough and tumble business in ways that can preserve relationships and allow you to approach a new issue with a fresh opportunity to try and win votes from places you didn't get them before. Some of you may have heard of this book, Everything I Needed to Learn in Life I Learned in Kindergarten. Well, my version of that is everything I needed to learn in Congress I got practicing law in a small town. Because let's say you knock heads hard with the other lawyer in town, you can hate him for the rest of your life, except you're going to see him at Kiwanis on Wednesday. And then you're going to be standing on the sidelines of the kids' football game Friday and probably usher in church together on Sunday. You can't afford to make a permanent enemy. You got to knock your heads, and then whether you like it or not, you're going to have to coexist. It's a community. You've got to coexist. And where I think we've really come away from a higher performance of Congress is the sense of community across membership has really, I think, fallen on hard times. And those things that might rebuild that sense of community across 435 people, each of whom fly home every weekend, is challenging. But we need to do a better job there. And if we do a better job there, maybe it won't be quite like looking at people as though they're absolute enemies to what you're trying to do.
Yes, this is exactly where I want to pick up. So you had the sense of public service and willing to do that and spending some time in Congress, and you arrive, right? So take us at that stage. To what extent, the organization you find there, does it live up to the expectations of nerdy, happy middle schoolers? Or is it set up with orientation activities, with community building and so on to work well, or was it a shock upon arriving?
I'll go first, and I'll try to be quick. It was a shock. I felt very prepared. I'd been an insurance commissioner. Each state has an insurance commissioner, and we got along well with the insurance commissioners. We pretty nonpartisan undertaking regulating insurance companies, and so I came to Congress feeling that'd be the same thing. I'll never forget going on a retreat. The agriculture committee went on a retreat. Well, it got boring. I got up to walk around. There was a couple of committee members sitting at a table. I joined them, got myself a cup of coffee, joined them. And I could tell from the look they had with each other, I just committed a terrible social faux pas. John Boehner and Bob Smith, who, one went on to be chairman of the committee, one went on to be Speaker of the House, but both very, very Republican. And this kind of mixing that I was so used to as insurance commissioner, that didn't happen. And so who knows, maybe they're charting strategy or whatever. I had no business at that table, but didn't know. Also, insurance commissioner, the average life of an insurance commissioner is about 18 months. Most are appointed and you roll out quickly. So you get together fast. Congress is the long game. And if I had known how long a game it was, I wouldn't have run for it. Because the first term stinks. And I mean, man, it took me several terms, I felt, before I was really getting my foundation. Now, we had a terrible flood and a town got decimated. And I had a lot of work to here, your town, Grand Forks, North Dakota, 1997, third term. We got them $1 billion in relief, me and the senators. With the help Newt Gingrich came to Grand Forks. I mean, so we were working with everybody we possibly could to get this thing fixed. So there were episodes, but by and large, it took me 10 years to get on the Ways and Means Committee. That was when things started to get more interesting. So you've got to be prepared for the long game. And if you look at Pelosi running again, Steny Hoyer, running again. This top tier of the Democrats they're all over in their 80s, and now they're no longer leaders even. But they're still running again. It's the long game, and I've really come to appreciate those that are hard-working legislators and in for the long haul. That's the best of the class up there.
Like Earl, I felt overwhelmed when I first came, and like Earl, I felt well prepared when I came. I'd been a congressional staffer for a couple of years. I had served in the Illinois House and the Illinois Senate. I was in the minority in both of those chambers. I was in the leadership in one of those chambers, and I thought, I'm ready. And I remember, I have an independent recollection of being, if you've been in the Rayburn building, there's these silly escalators. And I was with my wife, and I had a staff member, and we've just gone through a briefing about how to accept a subpoena. And I thought, what kind of a job is this? Oh, this is how if you're subpoenaed, this is how you got to, and I'm thinking, Judas, man, like what is this? And I turned to my wife and I said to her, this is like I'm drinking out of a fire hose. You are completely overwhelmed. So you win an election, you take a little time off, you hire staff quickly. You got to pick your office. It's like, well, I don't know where. You got to pick it, and you got to chasing the staff down. And do you have your press secretary yet? No, I don't have a press secretary. Well, you got to have a press secretary. And one thing after another after another. It is cascading in on you. And so what ends up happening, I found, is there was an inflection point for me about 6 months into my first term, where I gathered my staff together and I said, okay, we have now been reacting to everybody else around us. React, react, react. Someone else is writing their agenda across my forehead. And we've been on our heels for 6 months. We're stopping that now. We're going to get on the balls of our feet. We're going to be the ones. We'll still respond to things. We'll still take meetings, et cetera. But now, here's the agenda that we're going to be about. This is the type of meetings I want you to set up. This is how I want you to organize my time. And I recall it. I recall that sort of feeling. So there's a dynamic, there's an ebb and flow to this that I think is significant. I would submit that that's what it takes to be effective. If you want to be effective in a legislative body, you've got to learn the language. You've got to learn that when people say, I don't have a problem with that, you're dead. You got to learn the code words. Oh, I don't have a problem with that. Over. So there's a lot of sort of the sub vernacular that you end up picking up, but after a while you kind of get that vibe, and you learn how to kind of create coalitions. Think about getting $1 billion to who knows where, North Dakota. That's no joke to be able to do that, and to be able to compel other people to say, why should they care? And they care about Earl, they care about the relationship, but he had to pitch them, and he had to make sure that this is a priority. And he doesn't do that if all he's doing is taking meetings based on everybody else's initiatives.
So as Alan was mentioning at the very beginning, you both performed quite well as effective lawmakers, so you made that transition somewhere along the way, maybe 6 months in, maybe earlier, maybe later. A few other tips you could give for effective lawmaking?
I've more or less said, well, one, preserve your opportunity to work with anybody. If you don't like them, keep it to yourself. Another day is going to come where they may be handy to you. Secondly, one of your questions did allude to this. There's so much interesting stuff coming through the door. It's just unbelievable. But you can't respond. You can spread yourself really, really thin, and then you're no good to anybody. So where are you going to focus? And you do have to have some focus. I'm not known for focus in my personal life, and so it was terribly challenging for me. But of course, North Dakota provided focus. I was the one guy there, and I was going to be judged by reelect by whether I delivered or not. But I also was interested in some things from my insurance commissioner days, and and a couple of things that might seem odd. Defined benefit pensions. I was the last champion of defined benefit pensions. They're all but going away, and I'm trying everything to keep. That was one thing, and the Balkans, the Western Balkans. Peter has done some really good work in international. We may or not have time to talk about it a little further, but he's really been a leader relative to our outreach to trying to build democracies in other countries. And you can have these congressional trips. You can fly all over. It's just quite fascinating. Hopefully you do some good while you're at it. But I thought it would be better just to focus on one area. So the Western Balkans has been my area, and it's always terribly interesting and controversial region in the country. And so focus is another thing that is really important to performance.
That's great advice. A couple things come to mind. I was appointed to the Illinois Senate and determined that I didn't want to be the person that showed up and just was talking all the time. So I decided that I was not going to say anything on the Senate floor for 1 year. And what ended up happening was I would speak in committee, but I wouldn't speak on the floor. Then after a year, I got up. And what I found was, because I hadn't been shooting my mouth off, when I spoke, people thought, oh, wow, what's he got to say? And eventually I became the floor leader. So all they were doing is listening to me all day long after that. I think the same thing is true. I got great advice from Mike Rogers from Michigan. Mike Rogers, I'm a new member. Mike Rogers kind of mentored me and helped me during my campaign and helped me get settled and so forth. And he saw me on the House floor one day, and he came over and he said, "Here, sit down." He goes, "Listen, at home, you're a United States congressman. Here, you're a freshman. Spend a lot of time at home." Great advice. It was, in other words, he's saying, build your own constituency at home. Build, go out and have a sense of reflecting your district back to Washington. So I would create a discipline where I'd go into companies or go into schools or clinics or whatever it happened to be regularly, and I would tell them, my job is to reflect you to Washington. I am not Washington's representative to this district. So if I'm going to represent the district and I'm going to reflect you, I got to know what's going on. And so it became incredibly helpful to try and do that. And I just want to emphasize Earl's main point. That was, there is an absolute smorgasbord of issues that is before a member of Congress. And many, many, many of them are fascinating, and they're multifaceted as well. It can become a complete distraction, and it can completely overwhelm you if you just start chasing every interesting thing. And so giving a little bit of a reflection of what are your district's priorities, what committee are you on, which should be reflecting your district's priorities, what are your own aptitudes and so forth. Develop an expertise there, because what you want to ultimately do is you want to be the person who at some point when an issue comes up, they say, what do you think? And if you're asked that question, think about any dynamic when you're in and someone is asked what they think, the imprimatur of approval and the pre-listening that's happening is breathtaking and so much more influential than the dynamic of, hey, I've got something to say here. It's like, oh, great. So you want to create as much of a platform and an opportunity, and this is not a manipulation. It's basically an invitation to try and be as impactful as you can for your constituency. So focusing in, and then what you also learn to do is rely on other people. So the committee process is designed to break up the workflow. So if somebody's on the Financial Services Committee and they have basically your political philosophy and they're wrestling with issues and they're dealing with the hearings and they're going through the markups and they're doing all this sort of stuff, chances are They know what they're talking about. And if it's a bill that you're not familiar with, go and ask them, what do you think I should do on this? And why? Why are you voting this way? And get that sort of feedback. That level of collaboration and a little bit of humility as one is approaching those things to recognize their own limitations in terms of subject matter, I think goes a long way.
Great. Well, thanks so much for this. We're definitely going to open up to the floor for some Q&A in a few minutes. But before we do, I want to shift gears slightly. We've already, in your comments, we've alluded a little bit to what's going on in the world today. And I wanted to ask you a couple specific questions. One is, among the many reasons why we're excited to have the both of you here is the fact that you overlapped a little bit in Congress, but then from start to finish between the two of you, we have almost 25 years of time in the House. And it's also the case that you both served on Ways and Means. So you both know a lot about tax policy and what it takes to, say, fund the government. And apropos that point, it seems like where you might be on the cusp of another shutdown sometime in the very near future. And both of you had some firsthand knowledge of what it's like being in a government shutdown. Congressman Pomeroy in the 104th, you were personally witnessing a government shutdown of 21 days. In your case, at 113th, I think the government shut down for 16 days. As we move ahead to the middle-ish of November, I'd just be curious to get your gut reactions on, to what degree what we're witnessing in real time today is similar to or perhaps different from what you witnessed in your own time in Congress, and do you see an easy way out? Well, there's no easy way out, but what do you see the natural path forward in this period of time?
So I think that, so these shutdowns are real. My experience is I was there for the shutdown over Obamacare. Obamacare is still in existence. I was there for the shutdown over we're going to build a wall. There's still really not a wall. I was there for Chuck Schumer's shutdown of we're going to do this on DACA. It didn't get done. And now we're on the verge, and I mean, you can set your clocks to it. So this is going to shut down next month. And this shutdown is kind of like over, like, what again? What are we shutting down for? So it's not really well articulated in my view. The fact of the matter, I represented a constituency that didn't feel a lot of shutdown pressure. I didn't have a lot of federal employees in suburban Chicago. The Social Security checks, Medicare, that was all happening. The mail was getting delivered. TSA and the air traffic control was all being handled. The troops were getting funded based on things that had passed and so forth. So it wasn't this crucible sort of sense of pressure. Now, I recognize that in some districts, there was a lot of pressure, and I'm not minimizing at all the impact in real life of a government shutdown on people. It's significant and very, very consequential, but it's not the same sort of political dynamic where I didn't have people all over my district office, for example, demanding that the government open. It's kind of an interesting dynamic. So we're at these episodic seasons where there's few must-pass pieces of legislation that people feel like I've got to get this bill attached to it, or I've got to run this theme through this shutdown process or a debt ceiling. And I would submit that it's very, if you were evaluating the next study that the two of you do, you're evaluating the effectiveness of government shutdowns on moving a policy, you would score it as a 0. And yet it creates drama, it creates, fundraising opportunities and hyperbole and overstatement and overcharacterization and a false expectation, going back to expectations, about how easy something is. We'll just shut it down until they say yes. Well, it's like, well, it doesn't work, and yet we're on the verge of it.
We're normalizing extreme behavior. So what would be a really dramatic and bold strategy, when Gingrich did this in '95, he wanted to make the point, we're going to shut down government, and you're not even going to notice. And that's going to show that government is too big, too bloated, too expensive, and if it goes away, you're not even going to know. It didn't work worth a damn. People are ticked off. Now, what's happened in the 3 shutdown sense is they've put some things in, so we're paying essential workers. We've actually dampened the pain of it, buffered the pain of it a little bit with kind of these extraordinary measures, but we're just more used to it. I still think it's not going to work well at all. I think I've watched these 3. The person, the perpetrator gets blamed every time. It doesn't work very well. There's a big difference, though, in terms of how this is coming about. Gingrich had a command and control model. Brilliant man, little undisciplined, but he's a strategic genius, and he called the shots. Now it's the rabble are just tipping things over, and in this very closely divided Congress, if they still try to do it with one party only, the majority only on these big issues of what comes to the floor and this kind of thing, we're going to have a shutdown, but it's not led by anybody or anything. It's just it happens because Congress isn't functioning. I've not seen one of those. And I think what we're seeing with the Speaker thing, it's easier to wreck stuff than put back something that gets us going again. It's happened with the Speaker election. I think it happens with the shutdown as well. So I don't look forward to this. Now, in your, hold the presses, I'm going to say something nice about Speaker McCarthy. He had 2 really big things to get done in his time up to this point. Avoid default on the debt and avoid shutdown. He did avoid the default on the debt, thank goodness, and we kicked this out a while. We got a little breathing space. We'll be confronting this again, and I'm afraid we're going to do this sometime because we just seem to get a little closer to the edge all the time, but it didn't happen on his watch. And he also avoided the government shutdown, and I think set the stage to where we could have avoided it again, except that he had built himself operating rules for the Speaker that were way, way too fragile, and Matt Gaetz, trying to make a name for himself in Florida, took him out. One guy, and then losing 8 votes. It was ridiculous. You can't have a body of 435 representing the United States of America subject to that kind of extraordinary fragility where one guy can take you out. So however they build us back, we'll get a Speaker, and I hope that Speaker has got some operating rules that let us get through the end of this session. And that means, as a Democrat, I'm saying, please get yourself some rules, create a stronger Speaker, please. The place doesn't work without one.
Just one point of clarification. So it was one guy who made the motion, but a majority of the House voted to remove the Speaker. And so McCarthy's challenge was he was unable to secure the 8 votes on his side of the aisle, and every Democrat said,
got 0.
We're not coming in to rescue you, right. So you're on your own.
Fair, clarification.
I want to follow up on this before we open it, because this is shockingly timely, especially given a certain roll call vote that happened about 45 minutes ago. Given your own perspectives, given you're both from different parties, essentially, do you have any short to medium term predictions about how the speakership contest ends in terms of when do you expect us to have a speaker? Do you have a guess as to who it might be or who it probably won't be?
Yeah, I can tell you a whole lot of people it's not going to be. My prediction is there's a couple of inflection points, and it's hard for me to see beyond these inflection points. But President Biden today announced his Israel, Ukraine, and border package, and there may have been something else in there, but it's about $100 billion. I assume that the Senate's going to take that up at some measure and move that fairly, as expeditiously as the Senate does. Then the House is faced with a real conundrum. What do we do with this? And the pressure, there's very strong support for Israel on the Republican side, and on the Republican side, it's a jump ball on Ukraine. I'm very strongly for Ukraine, but it's a jump ball. And so the question then becomes, what does a majority begin to say about some of these sort of esoteric questions about the Speaker pro tem's authority and so forth? And do they instead and say, look, we've got the IDF that is about to do a ground invasion of Gaza. We've got a strong interest in supporting Israel. Let's move this package on an incremental basis, give the Speaker pro tem authority to move this bill alone, and let's have this discussion after this vote. If the House does that, that's crossing a procedural Rubicon. That is the House making a decision to take up something substantive, not procedural, under the Speaker pro tem's authority by giving him authority. Now, if I'm a Democrat in the House, my calculus is probably, I don't want to pick a battle on this. I don't want to argue about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin and like process questions when we're trying to get this money to Israel. I'm likely to be persuaded to go along with this. That'll be an interesting dynamic. The other thing is, at some point, so let's assume for the sake of argument that that's true, that the House manages to take this bill up before it has an official speaker and moves it through and the president signs this into law. Then you're right back where you were. You've kind of crossed a Rubicon, but your feet are still kind of wet, so to speak. Then the question becomes, who can do this job? And I think that the House is going to have to, House Republicans are going to have to suffer more. That this is like a hockey fight. And both teams have to completely exhaust themselves on the ice. And they're not tired enough yet. And when they're tired enough, then I think what will happen is there could be somebody that emerges who is not a current member, who can say, look, we will ask you to be Speaker for this Congress, which is contemplated in the rules, not Donald Trump. Somebody outside of the House will ask you to be Speaker, and a high functioning move forward would be for that person to say, I will accept this miserable job that you've asked me to do, but I'm not going to play your game. In other words, we're not going to write bills in the Speaker's office anymore. The Speaker's not going to be making power moves. Committee chairman, you do your work. You create legislation for the contemplation of the whole House. Majority Leader, you schedule it. Whips of each team, you work for it or against it, depending on what you negotiate. And I'm going to be more of a first among equals and a presiding officer here. And I would submit that if that is what nets out of this, and that we have basically a national legislative palate cleanser for the rest of this Congress, that would be a favorable outcome. And frankly, it's the only type of outcome that I can see right now. I do not see a current sitting House Republican who can get 217 votes. I think if a current House Republican makes a deal with the Democratic leadership, they are gone. It's just not sustainable. So it's really hard to see around these corners.
Back in the depth of the Cold War, CIA, the best of our CIA talent would look at the Russians standing on the thing, looking over at the munitions, the cannons and whatnot going by, the tanks and the airplanes, and they try to figure out, okay, what's the next leadership of Russia based on who's peering over with their big fur caps. I've been that successful with trying to figure out what the Republican conference is going to do next in this thing. Look what happened yesterday. I thought it made perfect sense to elevate Patrick McHenry, who's Speaker pro tem. So it's not like we've gone through three of the most prominent leaders within the conference, all rejected. McCarthy, Scalise, Jordan. Okay, well, we're not going to, no one can get a broad enough deal to accept the leader. So McHenry's already there. Let's give him some time and let's give him some power. And it's kind of a half step. So it's not, if we can't do the full step, let's take a half step. It made perfect sense to me. Jordan was arguing this in the conference yesterday, 4-hour conference, rejected. So they don't want McCarthy, they don't want Scalise, they don't want Jordan, and they don't want an interim measure. What the hell? Yeah.
What's the problem with the interim measure? Why was it rejected?
Why?
What was the problem with the interim measure?
Yeah, why the interim measure fell short. I believe it was a couple of things, and I'd be interested in Peter's thought. One, I think that there was a group that thought McHenry is going to allow to the floor voting on a CR, and at the end of the year, because they're only going to do this through December, he's going to allow an omnibus vote funding the federal government through the rest of the fiscal year, going till September, through September of next year. And so they didn't trust an interim guy that they really didn't have control over. Secondly, some don't like Jordan. And Jordan was going to campaign the whole 2 months, and in that kind of pressure, continuing to, so the race for Speaker would continue. Jordan was going to continue to campaign for Speaker. They didn't want him out there in that field over this 2 months. So that was another group. And those are the only two reasons I can think of. Peter, was there another one?
I think McHenry is very closely allied with McCarthy. And so McCarthy is still operating out of the Speaker's office where McHenry is. And so the feeling was McCarthy would have way too much influence.
I don't think, though, it's going to be possible to. I think it's kind of a political science solution, what Peter just outlined. I don't think the institution can be that bold as to get a non-member Speaker operating with constraints like Peter outlined. I mean, that could work. There's nothing dumb about what he just said, but I just can't imagine it happening. And so they're going to continue to. I do agree with the part about them fighting some more.
I agree that it can't happen today, but this going on and on and on, I think breaks down those norms and it breaks down resistance, particularly in light of no other candidate being able to put it together.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Well, we've obviously started transition to questions, and we have, I believe, 6 or 7 minutes, so we could probably do a quick lightning round. So please, I think we have a mic coming right over to you.
All right. Mr. Pomeroy, you referred to this trend of a portion of American voters who seem to be more in favor of authoritarianism than democracy. And so in light of the history of democracies throughout the centuries, and there have been decline in democracy, you know, after the First and Second World War, but we've had current instances: Venezuela, Orban, the Palestinians elected Hamas in 2006. There's not been another election since. So I'm asking your thoughts about these American voters, but also in the past, based on history. Are they just for might makes right, or my way or the highway? Are they anti-democratic? Will they regret it?
Right. Well, a couple things. First, Paul Ryan was quoted recently as former speaker, is talking about, we've been a kind of a policy party, now we're kind of a politics party, and he's talking about the populism that's all stirred up, and they're not really focused on an agenda. It's just they're all kind of his power, and certainly Trump illustrates that. I believe that there's an attraction to holding power. Now, the way you hold power is you win elections, traditionally. But I believe we're moving to a point where there's attraction to minority holding power. Now, we already have a number of institutions, provided the Constitution itself, that provide this. This gerrymandering is killing Congress. That's a whole we're going to talk all afternoon about that one. North Dakota has 2 senators, so does Illinois. Makes no sense. I mean, it is what it is, but it's in the Supreme Court, lifetime tenure, and now we saw that, well, Merrick Garland, 11 months before election, we had to let that one go to the voters. Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies in October, or late September, and we end up with a new justice. I mean, you almost have to, at this point in time, control the Senate to be able to get your nominee through. That's very different, very, very different than before, and it's empowered further the minority, the institution that truly is about minority power, the Supreme Court. So I don't think these things are bubbling up from the grassroots. I think that this is, efforts of those on the far right, well orchestrated, well funded, well connected, to use the democratic institutions, and this is what's happened in these other countries, use the democratic institutions to make it less democratic going forward. And we already, from a cold stop, there's some undemocratic features to our Constitution.
I share Earl's insight. I think that there's more to the story. The more to the story is that there's very few voices that are out there that are making a pitch for democracy, that are saying, look, here's the alternative. So when Earl and I, we've both been involved in an institution that he alluded to called the House Democracy Partnership, which partners with emerging democracies around the world. And we've both had occasion to sit opposite our counterparts, parliamentarians in emerging democracies. And these are countries, Sri Lanka, Mongolia, Kyrgyzstan. They're democracies, but they're under a lot of pressure and a lot of authoritarian backstory and a lot of authoritarian pressure. And to interact with them is to rekindle within them, and then you find out it's kind of rekindling within yourself as you're doing this, but rekindling within them why democracy matters and how it is to be celebrated, it is to be defended, and so forth. And there's really not much of that going on in our public life today. So many civic programs are out. You know what I mean? Kids are not, there's not the type of experience that I had as a young boy going through public school and learning these things. A lot of these programs are marginalized, and I'm not laying this all at the feet of curriculum by any stretch. But you take my point in terms of cultural affinity, a celebration, and a defense of something. And unless there are voices who are making a point and defending it, articulating it, the authoritarian voice says, everybody's an idiot. You're chumps. You're losers. You can't get things done. Give the authority to me. I'll get this done. And so if our expectations are, we allow ourselves to sort of be manipulated into this, then we get what we deserve, frankly. We know better. Ronald Reagan said, it goes from one generation to another. He said, it takes a generation to throw away this freedom. And he was right. And we're sort of dabbling with that. So as I was with a group of seniors recently. My mom is 93 years old, and I got hustled into a talk at her place. And they were great. I love them. But I kind of brought it that day to them. I said, look, if you're telling your grandchildren, and all you're doing is grumbling at the television set and grumbling at the news every time your children see you or your grandchildren see you, you may be pushing somebody away. And if you're telling your grandkids, oh, you're an idiot, don't go into that. That's complete foolishness. Look at them all. They're all a bunch of hustlers. You're not doing us any favor. And you're not doing your grandchildren any favor by creating that and sort of that sense of poison. And it is so easy to be cynical. Let me make one other quick point. I went to, I had an old Sunday school teacher of mine who was a wealthy investment banker, and he was a good supporter of mine. And when I was 40 years old, I had lunch with him, and I knew him well enough to ask this awkward question. I said, and he was really crazy rich. I said, what's it like to be that rich? What's it like? I said, I'm willing to learn, But what's it like to be that rich? Because don't you feel like everybody who's coming around is hustling you and manipulating you and so forth? And he said something to me that I think was providential. I think God was talking to me. And I think that what he said to me was, Peter, if they're manipulating me, that's their problem. That's not my problem. He said, don't be cynical. Guard your heart against cynicism. Nothing good comes from a cynical heart. Wow. That really shaped me. And I think I'm not naive, and I'm not suggesting just being foolish and whistling past these signs. There are real authoritarian trends that are emerging. But what I am saying is we are stewards of this great idea. You and I have been raised in a culture where this is an expectation that we are free people and free citizens, and we have an ability to make things happen and get things done. And if we celebrate that and we're joyful about that, wow, that creates so much space and life and opportunity, as opposed to saying, oh, no way, it's done, it's a complete waste of time, grumble, 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 you know, Mavis, get me the thing, I'm turning the clicker off. That's not the way we want to live.
Effective lawmaking as a cornerstone of American democracy. Thank you very much for joining us. Please join me in.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Always a pleasure. Great.